Okay, Nick, so thank you so much for joining us on our podcast about diversity. And I particularly wanted to speak with you because I know it's something you've been focused on for a while now, and you've taken some concrete actions to diversify your team. And I've really enjoyed watching that journey. So I guess the first question that I know my listeners would be keen to know about is um, what that journey was. You know,
Yeah,
what engaged you in this process
yeah,
to
of
become
course.
more diverse?
Of course. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. Second of all, I certainly can't say that I'm perfect. You've probably built me up and bigged me up and said, you've taken concrete action and you've diversified your team. And look, we've done some things that have worked, but I certainly couldn't say that it's job done because I think this is an ongoing, never-ending process. So
Yeah.
I wanted to give that as a precursor to any answer really that I might give. Also, at some point during this podcast interview, I'm probably going to say something that's not quite as it should be. I'm human, but I'm doing my best. All right.
But yeah, but here's the thing, Nick, like, we work with so many organizations that are trying to become more diverse and equitable and inclusive. And for me, there's something unique in the approach you've taken, which is why I'm not bigging you up, is what I'm trying to say. I think I genuinely believe that, you've taken an authentic approach to having an inclusive culture at work.
Yeah, thanks. And so, yeah, well, I mean, what was the journey? I suppose probably will start to give some insight as to, you know, like explaining what the journey was. Will give some insight as to some of the action we've taken.
Yeah.
So, the journey, I suppose, the start point, and I've been building teams for a number of years. Had a few different companies. We've had the team we have currently is the biggest team we've ever had. We've got 25 people. Previously, I'd had teams that had grown to maybe 18, 20, and there was no deliberate, intentional strategy to create a diverse team, to create diversity and inclusion at all. There wasn't, I probably thought what I suspect a lot of people think, which is I don't have any focus on anybody's ethnic background, sexual preference. Like, it's not important to me when I'm hiring.
Yeah.
And I thought that was the right way to go. I thought that if you don't factor that into your thinking, then that is creating, equity. It's creating equity. It's creating an equal playing ground for everyone.
Yeah.
I was very
What
naive.
what many organizations call a meritocracy, right?
Exactly. And I used that word. I was like, look, it's meritocracy, irrelevant of anybody's ethnic background, sexual orientation, all the other things to consider. Like, it's the hires are made on merit. So I thought I was doing the right thing. So for many, many years, fast forward to, I'm guessing probably summer 2020, right? And, I wouldn't say a significant social media presence, but, I have a social media presence, and I create content and give my thoughts and opinions on business and how best to market and sell and build your team and all this kind of stuff. And kind of summer 2020, of course, as many people will remember, the kind of Black Lives Matter movement really started to explode. And there was a lot of information being published, a lot of attention being put onto this subject. And I found myself, as somebody who creates content and speaks on social media on various different issues relating to business, I found myself not saying anything. And it felt uncomfortable. But I started to ask myself, why? Why am I not saying anything? Why do I commentate on all different things related to business, but this subject I'm staying clear of? Why is that? And so what I decided to do was I decided to start asking questions and interviewing people who were more informed on this subject than me. And so I put together a little, you'd probably call it I guess a kind of panel, if you want, of people that I know well, that know me, that certainly won't judge me for asking certain questions. They know who I am and what I believe and what I'm about. And I basically just called up a few people that I knew, people who are business colleagues, friends, people that I've worked with over the years, ex-employees, and I just basically said, hey, like, I feel nervous about saying anything about this.
Right.
And the reason I feel nervous is because I don't want to get it wrong. I don't want to say something that's going to cause offense, and therefore I'm going to get slammed, embarrassed. I'm going to get a load of hate online for being the privileged white dude that said the wrong thing. So I just didn't say anything. So the first stage of the journey was the learning I got from those conversations. And the learning I got from those conversations was that's the problem in lots of cases. You've got people at one extreme who are just hardline racist. That's unacceptable. You've got people on the other end of the scale. But actually, the majority of people, like, you've got people that campaign, like, that are racist. You've got people that campaign for, to try and create more awareness. Then I think it's probably 80% of the people in the middle, like me, just don't want to talk because they don't want to get it wrong. And so that realization was it was, I gotta say, it was really, really hard for me to get my head around, because I thought I'd been doing the right thing for so many years.
Yeah.
And so what happened was I actually asked a number of the people that I'd been speaking to form a panel, and we actually did a Zoom call like the one we're doing here with maybe 5 or 6 of us. Yeah. And I just interviewed them, and I broadcasted it on Facebook Live. I also recorded it and put it on my podcast. And the response was amazing, because, I probably haven't changed my position that much since then. I just basically said, look, I don't really know much about this, but as part of my education, what I am blessed to be able to do is I have an audience of people who listen to what I say. So I'm like, hey, don't listen to me on this subject. Listen to these people who have been there, that have experienced this, So that was really, really, it was great for me to learn, and also great for me to share that message. And I am getting to how we then created a more diverse workforce. Was one thing that really came out of that I realized was that I'd never deliberately, intentionally focused on the diversity in our team. But what I realized is that there was, and this is where my knowledge of the terminology is probably not what it could be, that there was some unconscious bias that was at play. Yeah. For example, go to our team section on our website, and by the way, the hardest thing for me was that even though I'd never deliberately created this, we had a 100% white workforce at that point in time. Yeah. Now, that doesn't mean that we hadn't had people from different ethnic backgrounds previously, but at that point, 100% white workforce. And so I was like, you go to our website, you see 100% white workforce. If you're a person of color, you're probably going to look at that and go, maybe that's not the kind of person I want to work. So instantly, we're probably going to less applications from people of color for our positions that are open. Yeah. Same thing in like our in our brochures, for example. We'd not deliberately intentionally done this, but we also hadn't deliberately intentionally championed diversity. A lot of things as well, with speaker lineups on our stages. We run live conferences, events, as you know, Ishreen. So it had never really been a deliberate focus for me up until that point. And you know what? The funny thing is, I couldn't give you here's the 8-step plan that we implemented. It wasn't that straightforward. It was really, we're going to start focusing and having an intention on this. That was really as much as it was. And then there were certain things we did as a result of that. So I don't know how well that explains it. But what I can tell you is that currently, as we sit here today, 25% of our workforce are people of colour, people from other ethnic backgrounds, which I think is progress.
It's absolutely. I mean, from 0 to 25% is absolutely progress, right? And so for our audience, Nick is my coach, and Nick runs a very successful business called Expert Empire. So I've been involved with and met the people who've joined the organization, and I've had conversations with them. And Nick, what I find is how you've created an environment in which they're genuinely happy. They genuinely feel that they can contribute, and they feel appreciated and valued in your organization.
Yeah, I hope so. And look, like it would be, it would probably be making it sound like better than it is to go, everybody is completely happy and they're never going to leave.
No,
Like, that's not reality.
that's not real, right?
But equally, I think, I appreciate your comment and your observation. And I think, generally speaking, we've got a great culture and a group of people that love coming to work every day. But that doesn't happen by accident. That's a lot of consistent action and, having a framework that we operate from day in, day out, week in, week out, month in, month out.
So Nick, we've got a lot of people in big organizations, in corporates, who are looking at how to make this happen. What are the top 3 things in your framework that you think they could learn from and maybe experiment with?
So is this related to diversity and inclusion specifically, or broadly creating a culture? Yeah. So first of all, if you've got a large organization, you have my deepest sympathies, because it's going to be a lot harder. Like, I was fortunate that I looked at my team in mid 2020, we're probably, 18 people, something like that. And I go, it's not that hard. Yeah. I'm not saying it was easy, but it's not that hard to get to 25%, people from other ethnic backgrounds, people of colour in your workforce, because you've only got a small team, right? Whereas to make that kind of impact on a team of 1,000 people or 20,000 people is really difficult.
Yeah.
So
but
you have my...
Yeah, I got it. But, the thing is, what we're finding works really well are little experiments.
Yeah.
And those little experiments can be run most effectively in smaller organizations. So I think our listeners can really benefit from the things you've done, because they can take them on as little experiments.
Yeah. So look, I think the first thing, I'm probably going to lack in specifics here because there isn't really much specifics, but the first thing was the intention. Like, the intention that I shared with the leaders in our business initially was, right now we have 100% white workforce and that feels wrong, and I'm embarrassed to lead that. So the intention is that we're going to start moving the needle and create a more diverse workforce. That was the first thing, and getting all the leaders in the business to buy into that idea, that philosophy. Yeah. And of course, initially, not all, but some of the people in the team, their position was what mine had been a few months previous. Yeah. Well, it's a meritocracy. We hire the best people for the best role. That's never been a consideration. And so I had to kind of like coach them in the same way that I'd been coached, to see that, it's not like we'd done anything wrong per se. We just weren't aware. So that was the first thing. It's setting the intention and getting the leaders in the business to understand why that intention's been set and to buy into it. By the way, this is the same when you're trying to initiate any kind of initiative. Sure. Is, from the leader of the business, in that case, me as the CEO, like, I can't just tell them, here's what we're doing, like it or not. I have to help them understand. I have to hear their concerns so they can all buy into that. Absolutely. So that was the first thing. The second thing then, I suppose that was the first and most important part, because then everything else almost happened as a knock-on effect, if you like. So, we were consciously, deliberately seeking members of our team that would create more diversity in the team. By the way, I'm not an expert on HR and law and all that kind of stuff. All I'll say is, I think I'd like to think that we did the right thing and did the best thing we possibly could by everyone. And look, the fact is, when somebody walked into our office who is from a different ethnic background or is a person of color, we're like, right, okay, like, we'd like, all things being equal, we'd like this person to join the team, providing, of course, that they've got the skills and the qualifications, and we think they're a good fit. We would like to give that person the chance. And I say what's interesting, Ishreen, even as I'm talking about this now, and we're a few years down the line, I can feel myself getting uncomfortable with this conversation. And the reason I want to share that is because I know there's so many people like me that avoid this conversation because it's uncomfortable. Like literally, I can feel I'm getting physically, like my body's getting warm because I'm feeling pressure that I might say the wrong thing.
Oh,
I'm
so
sharing
sorry.
that because
That's not what I want for you. But
no, but I'm sharing it because I want people to know that it's normal.
Yeah.
And look, the fact is this, like any, and by the way, CEO of a group of companies, I have to have a lot of difficult conversations that make me feel this way.
Sure.
And what I've learned is to be more comfortable having the difficult conversations. But what I'm sharing is this is a difficult conversation, and that's okay.
Yes.
That it's a difficult conversation.
Yes.
And look, let's face it, as a white man, I'm probably going to feel uncomfortable having this conversation because I don't have a lot of the experiences that you, Ishreen, or many other people have grown up with, have learned from.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I get it. So number one is to state the intention. Number two is to get your team really to kick the tires on your intention and align with it. And
number three was visibility. Number three was visibility because actually there were things that, like, for example, our brochure for our Mastermind program, which of course you've seen, we hadn't consciously, deliberately chosen who to put in the Mastermind brochure as kind of client profiles and stuff. We just made a conscious decision. We were like, we need to make sure that within this brochure that, like, and by the way, male, female, well represented, people from different ethnic backgrounds, people of color, well represented. We were like, we want to make sure that this is a real well-rounded, and even things like that, just the things in your business that are visible, trying to deliberately and consciously give. And actually, a lot of the time, again, it hadn't been done deliberately, but it actually didn't give a real impression of who we are and what the environment's like. It was, when we made some of these changes, we already had a more diverse team, but we just hadn't updated stuff. And it was like, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So, and I don't think it's a coincidence that, once we'd brought in a couple of team members from different ethnic backgrounds, that then more people then joined from different ethnic backgrounds. And I think that will continue because it won't feel like, oh, I'm kind of the only person here that looks like me, and so I'm like the odd person out, what I learned from these people that I had these conversations with was that actually, often what you see, as in, if you're looking at a company, it's not necessarily true, but it's the opinion. It's like, you look at it and you go, oh, is there like some, like they might believe that within our company there is actually, a problem, a systemic racism problem, even though it never was and isn't. But like, if you see a whole white workforce, then you'd be excused for maybe making that assumption. So I think the third thing was visibility.
Yeah, no, got it. Thank you. So Nick, you know that we believe that at the skinny edges of why there's no movement or very little movement around diversity, equity and inclusion is that privilege is not talked about, and privilege is not managed and stewarded in a way that unlocks everything else. Okay, so I'm really interested in your view of how privilege and privilege risk had prevented you from acting sooner.
Yeah, I think the easiest answer is that it was just, quite frankly, I was naive and unaware. That was it. Like I wasn't aware of my own privilege, really. It's like, you go, I'm a white guy. Yeah, I understood the concept, but I didn't really think about it deeply. And I don't know if this is a question you were going to ask anyway. The conversations that I had in summer 2020 with some amazing people, there were two in particular that really stood out for me. One, a guy who runs a business in the same industry as us. He actually teaches people how to people of color how to become financially free through investing in property. That's his business.
Right.
And the thing that really stuck with me, we had a long conversation, a couple of hours probably, and he asked me a question. He said, Nick, how many times have you been stopped by the police? And I went, ever? 3. And he was like, I stopped counting at 30 times before I was even 20 years of age.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that right there is like, that shocked me to know. And again, I don't know if that would be true for all people of color. You know, this is a black guy. Like I'm going, there's no way in the world that's even so far, it's so far apart. And that I was shocked because I didn't know that to that degree that existed. I was really shocked.
So we need to increase awareness of that, don't we?
Yeah, exactly. I think that was, and by the way, I think that's one conversation I had with one guy, but it really, really affected me deeply because we're similar age as well. Similar, we both run businesses. He's a very successful guy. Like I'm going, we're not that different, but our lives in that one respect have been completely different. And that's weird. That's that. And I think that's the unconscious bias. It's the, it's the unawareness of privilege, I think.
Yeah. So that's cool. So this podcast series is exactly about erupting privilege. So I'm hoping that that's making a difference,
Well, and actually, I hope that really the only reason I talk about this stuff now, with people like you, Ishreen, that host this podcast, and that I put an episode like this where I interviewed people on my podcast is I want people like me to feel more comfortable having this conversation.
Great.
And to have everybody still know that I'm still not 100% comfortable having this conversation.
Sure. So now I'm wondering, I get June 2020, everybody was talking about it and there was a buzz and you started exploring it from the point of view of almost a social commentary. But what was it that actually motivated you to make the change?
The change in the business or to start talking about this?
Change in the business, because talking about this, I think a lot of people do, but you went beyond talking to making concrete change. What was it that motivated you to make that concrete change?
Yeah, and by the way, I think in order to be fully transparent, like it's not like that was a light switch. It wasn't like we went from June 2020, right, now we're in massive action. It's been a gradual process over time. But and actually the first thing, as I shared before, the first thing I did before commentary was nothing. And then as I had conversations, I was like, well, actually, that's part of the problem. So I'm going to start doing something and talking about it. The other reason I didn't talk about it, this might be helpful for somebody listening to this or watching this. The other thing I realized was that actually I was scared or concerned of talking about it and then people accusing me of jumping on the bandwagon, piggybacking on the back of, the fact that there was so much discussion about this stuff online. So there was loads of reasons why I'd avoided the conversation. But again, what I learned was to say that rather than like talk about the thing and leave out what was going on for me behind the scenes. I was like, hey, I've been worried about saying anything because I don't want people to think I'm only saying it for personal gain, to get more followers on Facebook or any of those things. I was like, that's a big concern. So I think that was, as I said, the start of the process. And what really motivated me to create the change in our organization was these conversations. And really there was the gentleman that I mentioned. In fact, I'm going to shout him out because he deserves it. A guy called TJ Atkinson, lovely guy. And then there was actually another person who we've been friends a long time. Her name's Shah Wasmond. MBE. And the reason I love Shah, and we've been friends a long time, so she gave it to me straight.
I heard it.
Yeah, but she gave it to me straight. And I don't remember the exact wording, but like in a private conversation, I mean, she gave it to me straight publicly when we were doing the interview. You probably listened to it, but actually on the in the private conversation, and you know, this is a subject very close to her heart. She's got so her partner passed many years ago, but she has a mixed race child. So she's a white lady, but she's got a mixed race child, and she's grown up in like a largely black community. So she knows this subject back to front, inside out, and I don't. But basically, she was, and she's really like massively champions diverse workforces, and that's what she's built in her company. And she was very firm with me about, this is my duty, this is my responsibility. And but she can do that because she's a friend, and because she knows who I am. And she's like, look, I'm telling you, Nick, this company, this team is not representative of who you really are, and I know that about you. And so she really called me to action on that, and really just called me to set the intention that as we develop and grow our team, which of course, you know, we always were going to do and have done. She was like, you know, and she gave me examples of how, you know, she's almost got people lined up, even though she didn't need to make hires now. She's got people ready that she wants to go and offer roles to in her company, that create more diversity in the workforce. So that was key.
That's really interesting. So she occurs to me as what I would describe as a reverse ally.
Yes.
Yeah. So she really held you to account and made sure you went through the thought process and the actions.
The other thing, on a more personal note, I was recommended, and I forget who it was. It might have been Shah, it might have been TJ, but I was just recommended loads of like movies to watch, TV shows to watch that really like explore this from a, you know, not just in a company culture standpoint, but just, you know, from a social perspective. And so there was a few things that I watched that I really loved, and again, it just keeps my brain focused on this being important.
Yeah, so each of us individually keeping it in our brains and keeping it current is an important thing. Good. So what thoughts had you had about diversity or even about privilege in your organization prior to June 2020?
Yeah, I think the word meritocracy, you already said it, was big for me. Like that's how I always positioned like how we operate in our business. And you know, my thoughts were that by, you know, advertising roles and bringing looking through CVs and interviewing the best people for the job, that we were doing the right thing.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's really interesting, isn't it? We're working with a client at the moment, and they've got a diversity committee and all of this, and they haven't got any people of colour in that diversity committee, and they're like, but we put it in our newsletters and we invite people to join us, and like they just don't get that. Especially if you're from an underrepresented group, you're not going to read something in a newsletter and come forward.
Yeah.
And part of your meritocracy argument, I think, is that, right? It's like we think if we just advertise it, people will come. You need to do more, right? Thank you.
Yeah, I think so. And one of the people, you know, I said I spoke to a group of people. One of those people was a client of ours, and I just straight out asked. I was like, have you ever felt as a client that anybody in my team or the culture that you've been around, our client base, have you ever felt, you know, that the colour of your skin was caused you to be treated differently in any way? And he was like, absolutely not. Like he was like, this, you know, I feel absolutely, it's all great. And again, he's a young guy. Probably has a different perspective than some of the other people I had on the panel. Anyway, the reason I'm sharing this, he's now one of our coaches. So he's now joined our team. He's one of our team. And I go, I don't know. I can't prove that us having that conversation in June 2020 led him to join our company. But one thing I do know is it has to be a factor at some level, because that was probably a conversation that brought us closer together, and therefore, got us to where we are now. So,
but Nick, as a person of color, I find that a really difficult question to answer. I find that a really difficult question to answer because I don't know whether that's how you normally are, or whether there's something in my programming, my upbringing, that makes it an issue for me.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, when I look back, it was actually a terrible question that I asked him, because I go, it's probably like, the reason I asked the question probably was because I wanted somebody to tell me that I was doing okay.
Yeah.
That was really the reason behind the question. It was a selfish question. And actually, this guy, young guy, client of ours, looks up to me, respects me. Like, it would have been very difficult. I'm not saying he did feel uncomfortable, but like, it would have been quite difficult for him to speak up and say that in that environment. So, like I said, I was probably, if I'm being really honest, I was probably searching for validation in that question rather than actually trying to get, feedback or an answer.
Sure.
And I think, as you say, Ishreen, what's interesting is, and this is relevant for everybody, like, we're all filtering our experience today through however many years of your life that you've been living in the body you've been living in. So, I think everyone has different experiences of the same experience.
Absolutely.
Different perspectives of the same experience.
And I think that's what we need to all learn.
Yeah.
In order to have a more equitable environment. So, Nick, we work with our clients on their privilege conundrum, and we're doing a lot of research into the impact of privilege in the workplace and how that prevents equity and inclusion. So, Nick, what was your privilege conundrum?
I'm not sure what you mean by that question.
So, privilege conundrum is what gets in the way.
Okay.
So from a whole organization level.
Yeah. I think the conundrum probably was and still is for me a bit. We've got in our team like a very most of the team are really friends. They're really good friends. They hang out socially. It's a very laid back working environment. It's certainly not what you'd call a professional working environment, whatever that means. It's not a traditional corporate environment. And I think the conundrum for me is, how do we put policy and structure in place while still creating that environment where you can be yourself and have fun? And I don't want to create an environment where people are scared to say the wrong thing. But equally, I don't want an environment whereby we don't have any intention or focus on this subject, because it's really important. That's probably not what was my conundrum. It is still my conundrum, I guess.
It's an ongoing conundrum, isn't it? It's such a fine balance.
Yeah.
And then, how did you cause a privilege eruption in your organization?
Yeah, I think it probably started. I mean, it's a great word, and of course, it's what your podcast, Ishreen, is all about.
Exactly.
I'm not sure we've succeeded in that just yet, but I think and I'm talking now to the CEO or the owner or the managing director or the leader of any business or any organization. Like, it has to start with you. It has to. You can't. This is where I think I definitely sympathize with people that are in an organization that really that see how important this topic is and really want to create change from within. But the fact is, if the MD, the CEO, the owner of the business, whoever it is not on board, it's going to feel like you're banging your head against a brick wall. And so I think for me, how I did it was I went first, and embraced the uncomfortable conversation and even went public with it. It was one of those where, aside from our team, in April 2021, we ran an event. I think, Ishreen, you might have attended. It was a virtual event.
Yes.
And that was the first time. So this is probably like 9 months after, my initial kind of breakthrough on this. We ran an event and I made a point, like a very public point, of saying there are, and again, people that watch this, listen to this might not know the kind of business events industry as such. But I made a point of saying, look, there are too many events that are packed full of speakers who are white men.
Yeah.
And like, I'm championing diversity. I'm championing a place where people get opportunity regardless of background, ethnic origin, etc. And so, we really went to town on that lineup being, it was actually over 50% female, which is unheard of in our industry, by the way, completely unheard of. And I made sure that there was, I don't remember the exact number of speakers, but there was certainly, a very decent proportion of people of colour on the stage as well. And what's great about that, and has also made my life incredibly difficult at times since, is I can't take that back now.
Nope.
So it's like I couldn't. Then the next event comes round, and I'm like, I'm under pressure that I now have to keep doing what I said I would. Basically, and the reason I was a bit nervous about making that point was people would accuse me of only making it for personal gain. It's like, well, you're only doing that because you want to get credit, and then people want to come to your events. And I shared that was a concern as well, as I said before. But yeah, I think doing that, leading it in my business, leading it in our community, in our industry, and even now I still see a lot of events that are primarily male speakers, white men at that. And look, the fact is, yes, I have looked in the mirror recently. I'm a white man. So straight away, when I put together, a speaker lineup for an event, I'm like, well, I take 3 or 4 slots anyway because it's my event.
Sure.
And my business partner, Matt, in one of my companies is a white man, and I go, well, he's going to speak. So before I know it, I go, I've only got probably 12 slots at each event. And 5 of them have already been taken by me and Matt. So I go, well, I haven't got that much to play with. And, then we've got like our headline sponsor that we've been working with for years. And the speaker that presents on their behalf is a white man. So I'm now literally at the point where I'm going, right, I have to now deliberately, consciously, intentionally go out and find speakers who represent different groups. And I think doing that in April 21 was obviously there was some focus that I put internally around our team. That was the first time I did it externally from a kind of marketing point of view, to make that statement or that commitment. And it's created some challenges for me and actually it's created some really difficult decisions. But I'm really pleased that we've done it. And I think there's been, I can't measure this, but I believe that there's also a direct commercial benefit of doing this. Now, that's not the intention or the reason, but I go, it's not a coincidence now that as we've got a more diverse team, we've got a more diverse client base, and we've got more diverse speaker lineup, gives us a more diverse client base. That's just happened. But again, it all started with intention. Yeah.
So you erupt yourself first.
That's it. And also make, with our events, we do 2 big events a year. I invest a lot of money in them. So I'm talking, it varies, but anything between 200 and 500,000 pounds cost to run each event. So and we do that twice a year. So these are like the biggest things that we do. And so I think making a statement around diversity and inclusion on those events is probably the biggest statement I could make. Because they are, we're financially heavily invested in those events. They're also the things that are most visible as far as, or if the chances are, and you know, most people listening to this probably got no idea who I am, and that's fine. But the chances are, if you operate in our industry and you know me, or know of me, you actually know about Expert Empires, the event brand, more than me, because that's the brand that gets all the marketing and the exposure, and that's where all the advertising goes. So yeah, I think making a decision to have Expert Empires champion these things, diversity, inclusion, equity. I think that created the eruption, to use your phrase.
Yes, so that's causing a privilege eruption almost in the industry.
I hope so. You know, I think that might be overstepping it slightly, but I hope so. I hope somebody's taking notice, even if it's, you know, only one of the business in our industry that's taking notice and going, actually, you know what, I think he's doing this right, and I want to follow suit.
So, you know, Nick, eruptions start very small, don't they? They start with little bubbling up, and then it becomes this great big thing. So, so I'd take that acknowledgement if I was you.
Oh, well, thank you. Okay, I'll shut up and accept then.
Just to round off this part of the conversation, it would be lovely if you could again summarize what you say is the source of your success.
I think honestly, the biggest source of my success, and I haven't mentioned it yet, is the willingness to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
In that I was and am willing to hold my hands up and say, like, I don't have all the answers. And I'm also willing to ask for help.
Yeah.
And I'm also willing to accept that I might have made some mistakes previously, even though they weren't deliberate. I still hold my hands up and say, you know, this was a mistake.
That's courage, isn't it? That's what it takes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably the number one thing that has allowed me to make some progress in this area.
It's brilliant. I think you've given some really useful input to our listeners, Nick, so thank you. And as you may know, we end all our podcasts with these 5 quick fire questions that we ask all our guests to answer. So if you're ready, I'd like to get into that.
Do it.
Okay, so what privilege story has impacted you the most?
Yeah, I think, well, it has to be, I don't even call this a privilege story, but I think the story that my friend shared with me of, you know, how many times you've been stopped by the police? 3 ever. How many times you've been stopped by the police? Well, I stopped counting when it was like 30 before the age of 20. I'm like, that just, it was a real big, like, lesson for me and a shock, actually.
Sure. No, good. What's the latest book you're reading that's inspired you? What's the latest book I'm reading on any subject? Any subject?
What's the one? I get through. I don't really, by the way, this is a controversial point. I don't read books, but I listen to a lot of audiobooks. Okay. The last one that I listened to, it's actually a marketing book for those that are interested in this subject. It's called $100 Million Offers by Alex Hormozy. Okay. Very good, very good. And I've got a list of what's next on my list. I also listen to a lot of podcasts. So sometimes I'm in audiobook mode, sometimes I'm in podcast mode. I downloaded an audiobook recently. Oh yeah, that was the one that I recently finished. Building a Story Brand. That's another marketing one.
Oh, that's a great book, isn't it?
Yeah, so really love that.
All right. So what's your favorite indulgence?
That's a broad question. Like anything?
Anything. So long as it's clean.
Yeah, I'll keep it clean. Family show, right? Favorite indulgence. I think probably, would you call this an indulgence? Like me and my wife, pretty much every night we'll sit and watch TV for like an hour. And we normally got a Netflix show or something on the go. Yeah. And the show that we're on at the moment, which is brilliant for learning about diversity and inclusion. It's called This Is Us.
Okay.
And it's on Amazon Prime. It is brilliant. It's brilliant for understanding, I think, people from all walks of life, people with all different challenges. But, and this isn't a spoiler, I don't think, it's centered around a family that has, it's a white family, they have triplets, and then they adopt a black baby. And so there's a lot of points in that story, a lot of points in that show. We haven't finished it yet. A lot of points in that story and in that show where you see little glimpses of what it's like. For me, you know, as a white guy, or you can see what it's like for somebody who's a person of color that's growing up in a different world to what I am. So yeah, I love that show.
Oh, that's a great recommendation. This Is Us, right?
Yeah, really
This Is
good.
Us.
Have you watched it?
I haven't yet, but I'm going to. It's now on my top of my list.
This is my pitch for This Is Us. Watch the first episode. If you don't think it's one of the best shows you've ever seen, don't watch anymore.
Okay.
But it's incredible. And actually, some people that I've spoken to about it didn't love it. I think if you've got a family, even if they're grown up, but if you've got a family, you'll love it. It's brilliant.
Brilliant. No, I'm definitely going to watch that, maybe tonight. So, who has inspired you most to do what you do?
I'd have to say my mum. I'd have to. And of course, Ishreen, you know my mum.
Oh, I know. I love your mum.
You know, she took me along to a Tony Robbins seminar when I was 12 years of age. And, you know, not many kids get that opportunity. She also inspired me when she left her corporate career to start her own business as a coach. And, you know, I think I would not have learned the things I've learned, become the person I've become, if it wasn't for her and for the opportunities that she created for me and gifted me when I was young.
Yeah, we all owe so much to our mums, right?
Yeah.
And my final question, if you had unlimited resources to put together the ultimate resource for ensuring an equitable organisation, what would that be?
If I had unlimited resources
to put together the ultimate resource for ensuring an equitable organisation, what would that be?
Well, I think the resource for creating an equitable organisation that's most valuable, I think, is consistent training and education and awareness. It's not a one and done, and I think that's the danger. That's the mistake a lot of organisations can make. And by the way, I still feel like we're certainly in some ways at risk of this. Is like you got to make sure that it's a constant focus. And I couldn't say that it's a constant focus for us. You know, I think we've got good intent and we've taken some good action, but I think you've got to have constant focus. So, by the way, when you asked the question, here was my immediate thought, because it wasn't about creating a resource for an organisation. It was about creating a resource to create a privilege eruption worldwide. Would be having more information on this subject, stories on this subject, published in the places where people pay attention, i.e. Netflix, i.e. Facebook, Instagram, places like that. Just more. And I think people learn best through stories. I don't think people learn best through being lectured. I think stories are the way.
Absolutely. And Nick, thank you for adding to our story base around Privilege Eruption. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you, and thank you again for the contribution you're making to our listeners.
Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. And thanks for giving me the opportunity to learn, because even by having this conversation with you, I'm learning and it's causing me to consistently review and analyse what we're doing and what we could do even better.
Awesome. Thank you. All right.
Thanks.
See you soon.